Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the session Best Practice on How to Deploy Mobility as a Corporate Solution. The transformation from vehicle fleet to sustainable mobility can be complex. In this session, you will hear from Almy Magalhaes, who is the Senior Manager Procurement, Indirect and Services Europe of Ecolab, who will zoom in on the conditions and parameters to make mobility a corporate solution that is supported by both employees and stakeholders. Almy, thank you so much for joining us today from Barcelona. I'd like to invite you to start your presentation, and afterwards we'll take some questions from the audience.
Thank you for the introduction, Yves. Good morning, everyone. So, Ecolab. Ecolab is the global leader in water, hygiene, and energy technologies and services. And today we focus in 4 areas to shape the quality of life everywhere: clean water, safe food, health environment, and abundant energy. So basically, our business is around support restaurants to keep food safety, support hotels to provide clean and comfortable experience, help hospitals protect spreading of infections, and our technology and people also help companies to use less water and energy in their operation. Today, we also support energy companies to produce oil and natural gas efficiently with less impact in the environment. We are a total of 45,000 employees associated around the globe. We serve over 3 million customers in over 107 countries. And last year, we have a sales turnover of $12 billion. So what about our fleet scope? Before comment on our fleet, I want to emphasize the importance of safety in our company. Safety comes first, is part of our DNA, and in fleet would not be different. So this is a strong statement we take into account for any project. Today, in terms of fleet, we have around 23,000 cars spread in the different regions. Majority of these cars we use as a working tools, like LCVs and vans that our technicians, our consultants, our employees, experts use to visit and to serve the clients. And majority of these cars, we operate with the model of leasing, meaning around 9%. Today, we also act with a regional car policy in place. So North America and Europe, it's the 2 regions where we have the highest level of maturity and are the regions that drive somehow, let's say, the concept that we put in place on the regional car policy. When we talk about mobility, we really consider that mobility is a change management project and should be treated like this. Why? When we start to look over the last years, and majority of the companies, we have in the perspective of the fleet managers, we have the fleet management model of the leasing, of the buying, OPEX leasing, as the predominant model. And basically on this model, all the infrastructure, all the investment we put in terms of source, in terms of technology, it's to manage an asset, it's to manage the car as an asset. And we start to debate and to discuss about mobility. The big paradigm shift here, it's how to make the transition for this car-centric approach that the financial area, the fleet manager area or HR, all the areas involved, they have with the car as a centric to a more flexible approach. So finally, we turn to the concept of the mobility as a service. And here, it's very important we keep in mind three big statements that comes around the definition of this mobility as a services. The first is about the car that will not be replaced by mobility, but the trips that we have, the needs in our company that will be replaced by mobility. It means that at the moment that we start to think and to see and to identify what are the needs in terms of trips, not necessarily associated with the need of a car to make these trips happen, and even if it's this trip, it's related with working activity or as a benefit, we start to figure out and to better understand where we can introduce solutions in terms of mobility. The second big aspect, it's about the costs. It's about the switch from the total cost per car to the concept of a mobility budget. So essentially, here it's about not depreciation, it's not about CapEx anymore, but it's about an expense line that you introduce and the flexibility you have according to the solutions that you provide. Two important elements here. It's considering not only the financial aspect, but also the impact in terms of CO2 budget that can bring the introduction of the solution. Meaning that some mobility alternatives, they can be less impactful in terms of CO2 emission, but at the same time, they can bring financial benefits, especially when associated with some taxation benefits the company can get. And last but not least, it's really important to focus on the connection with the supply chain environment in terms of mobility providers. This landscape, it's quite rich, and there is a variety of companies today available in the market, however, with different levels of maturity. So following this last point, I want to show here what I believe it's a consistent market assessment a corporate company can go through in order to identify in the market the proper solutions for what it's needed. The first step, it's about on this mapping, when you look the market, it's make sure that you understand and you identify in the different segments what are the solutions available. Keep in mind that not all the solutions, the same type of company, they are able today to provide. It means that leasing companies, car manufacturers, travel companies, IT companies, all of them today, they are somehow introducing different solutions. However, I would say that none of them today provide the full scope of alternatives expected sometimes. The second step on this assessment, it's about to define clearly KPIs and metrics that make sense according to the nature of your business in order to properly assess the solutions available and to define what are the ones that best fits with your needs. And finally, with the combination of these two first steps, a company can end up with the preferred vendors listed. And usually, these preferred vendors or the vendors available in the market, they provide solutions in four big buckets. The first is about micro mobility. This is about e-bikes, share bikes, scooters, today very common and very popular everywhere, not only in big cities, considering the low investment required somehow in terms of the cost of the suppliers. The second, it's about the car-centric mobility, taxis, ride-hailing, car-sharing concept. The third bucket, public transportations, tickets, subscriptions, tickets that can allow the people to access different transportation models in the cities. And the 40, which is a group of more, let's say, secondary kind of services and mobility, it's linked with the flexible office spaces. For example, parkings, and also charts if you are already on the usage of the EV models. Many cases you have public parkings with infrastructure of charts available that your company can take advantage somehow. So overall, we believe that by running carefully all these different steps, you have a big chance to succeed to achieve, let's say, standard, speed, and scale on the implementation of mobility, even if the market is not full ready in terms of solutions everywhere. So what are the key elements and what are the targets to combine a project of sustainability and a project of mobility? So here in this flow, it's where we really believe that you can concentrate the paths, and by going through these paths, a fleet manager can design a proper, let's say, corporate mobility solution in a company. The first step, and very important, I highlight here, it's about telematics. Telematics, it's a complex topic somehow to bring and to get an alignment internally. However, more and more, it's becoming, let's say, easy to digest and easy to understand what are the alternatives, despite the restrictions that you can have by country in terms of data that you can access, but can be really beneficial if your company invests and have a telematic in place here to automate and to get accuracy in the data input coming from the cars. So this can be a very important start point and the baseline for the second step, which is about the definition of the strategy and the policy around cars, around mobility. So here we could define this as a mobility score calculation. So it's the need to spend some time to get deep analysis by understanding, looking inside your company and understanding what is the profile of your employees. What is the profile of the current drivers you have in your company? What are they really need and what are they really wish they have in terms of source to mobility? And here, take into account specific metrics, take into account tangible metrics in terms of distance, in terms of locations they are right now, in terms of the trip I mentioned before, they have the need to make, and what would be the best model that would make sense here. So this is the first advice in the second step. The second and very important advice is to take a holistic approach, not only with the fleet managers get involved on this assessment, on this deep analysis, but HR benefit, especially finance and IT team. Here in the end, in most of the cases, we take conclusions that the mobility, it's easy to start to introduce as a benefit, not as a working tool car, and HR play a big and important role in this strategic decision process. Finally, with all this data analyzed and with the conclusions taken here, is the time to go for the third step, which is about the tradition, car policy, car selector, that could be replaced for mobility policy. Let's put like this. Basically to reflect, according to the profiles of employees, what are the eligibility for the solutions available that the company starts to provide. And finally, we come back and we end up here where most of the companies they are today. In the concept of dedicated car, in the concept that the only solution available for the employees in terms of mobility is the car, where you have one car, exclusivity in terms of who use this car, one car allocate in exclusive for one specific employee. So here, it's really important considering that this will not disappear. What it means? It means that especially when we look working to demand, still there is the need to have this dedicated car for specific employees. The second is that about the alternatives in the market, they are not available everywhere. So not create an expectation that in every country you will be able to switch or to start to provide solutions because they are still not there. The third important remark here, it's considering that the work councils, they can put some restriction, or it may be require some negotiation if the company goes for a decision to exclude or stop to offer the car to these employees. In many cases, even if this car is using as a working tool, it's perceived as a benefit. It's perceived as an extra or an extensive benefit as part of the salary of the employees. And here it's required negotiations with work councils before any decision. And last but not least, I want to emphasize here that both projects, meaning a project related with EV adoption, electric cars, hybrid cars, and mobility, they can work in parallel. So a company doesn't need to wait to have the full definition about the proper strategy on mobility to finally start to migrate and to switch for electric cars. Here, especially for the dedicated cars, it's an opportunity for the company to start, because the expectation in terms of the future, it's a combination, not only dedicated, but mobility solutions available as well. Next step, it's about fleet system. Fleet system, we had a very successful and good experience in our company, and we believe that this is key in order to combine different source of data into one single system that enable us to get proper analysis and to start to get conclusions from the profile of our drivers, of our employees. So here it's a strong recommendation, regardless if a company move or not for the mobility concept, that investment in this type of system can be very beneficial to get conclusions if the company is also ready or not to go for mobility solutions. And finally, the last step, it's when you go for the adoption of the mobility. However, before we start to introduce the solutions, what I suggest and recommend here, it's really keep an eye on an alternative model, which is the pool car, that can be easy, faster, and smart way, let's say, to start already introduce mobility in a company without big changes or investments. So for the same cars today available, a group of employees, meaning 10 employees, for example, for 5 cars, can be assigned and eligible to the use of these cars. And today, many IT different companies in the markets, they are providing solutions to activate or to enable corporate companies to operate this type of carpooling with the current cars available in the company. So here is simply about change the mindset and change the concept that you have exclusivity in terms of driver to one car, but it starts to share a car. And finally, we go for the introduction of the new or additional mobility alternatives. So overall, I want just to conclude with this chart saying that today, most of the companies, yes, it's operating in OPEX, but it's very important, keep in mind that the future is not about no OPEX anymore, but it's about a balance and a combination of the different solutions in terms of mobility, on demand, and dedicated car, according to the need of your company. And just to finalize, how we look the future, in our company, in Ecolab specifically. To be very honest, considering the nature of our business, which is essentially or predominant B2B, we see some limitations to introduce at this stage mobility alternatives in large scale, especially when we look our working tool demand, okay? Especially when we look the demand of a consulting, a technician, employee expert that brings products, that brings equipments inside the car to visit a specific customer. However, we really believe that the future, and especially in terms of benefit cars, this can, yes, be a very important and smart solution to bring. And Our focus right now is primarily on the digitalization. It's ensure that we integrate our databases, that we manage our fleet. It's ensure that we have accuracy in this data, that we extract the proper information out of it. And we are sure that by doing this properly, in the near future, we are able to enabling the mobility solutions and combine these mobility solutions with a second priority we have right now, which is related with the electrification of our parking lot. So that's all for today. Thanks a lot, Yves.
Thank you so much, Almy, for the interesting slides and the presentation. We've got a couple of questions coming through on the chat and also to me directly. Let's start with a question from Poljan Alberson, who says, technology will play a significant role in the fleet and mobility management. What should a corporate look for when considering a vendor for a global technology project?
Yeah, well, I think here in the segment of different suppliers, even if the suppliers, these vendors, they are not ready right now to provide in different regions the solution, it's important to assess the potential they have to make it in the near future. Mm-hmm. So this can be a good start in Europe, in North America, where you have more maturity with this profile of suppliers to introduce or to assess and to pilot these solutions, considering that the willingness of these partners or these big partners is to extend in the future these solutions for regions with less mature. So the advice here is yes, on top of to look the local and very interesting solution, especially coming from startup companies, keep in mind that the big companies, they are somehow partnering with these small ones. And in the near future, they are able to provide solutions in regions that today they are not.
Mm-hmm. So from a procurement perspective, you would be willing to look at younger, smaller companies and not directly go to the SAPs of this world?
I would suggest to go for both. I would suggest to primarily start talking and starting to speak with your key partners, meaning the big leasing companies, meaning the big car manufacturers, in order to understand what they provide. However, keep your eyes on the local solutions you have available. Yeah. So if your company has a need to introduce mobility in countries where the big companies are still not there, most probably these small and local companies can be a solution as a start point. But in the future, it's important to keep in mind that if the goal is to optimize the supplier base, most probably the big companies are the ones that will be able to provide in large scale the solutions standard.
Yeah, your reference to technology has triggered a bit of a conversation on the chat, and we've got people who start saying, well, technology is important, but efficiency in operations is to be considered before tech. So is there a balance between operational efficiency and technology deployment?
Yeah. Well, I believe that the technology, it's a support for the entire operation that you manage in the car life cycle, and can be a support in terms of data you can extract and intelligence that you can extract out of this system you invest to be more efficient in your operation. To be more efficient in terms of mileage control, to be more efficient in terms of CO2 emission monitoring, to be more efficient in terms of fuel price tracking. And based on this type of monitoring and access of this data real time and centralized, we can get better decisions. You can make better decisions, especially when it comes projects associated with EVs deployment, projects associated with mobility. So depending the mileage, for example, or the length of the trips of specific employees, this is a specific target that you can have to switch immediately for an alternative solution. And this is just one example, of a benefit you can get from this investment on fleet system integration.
All right. You mentioned it just now, Almy, and you also mentioned it in the presentation where you were talking about CO2 budgets. Now, can you develop a little bit around that concept of CO2 budget versus a money budget?
Yeah, so usually and traditionally, we see the companies, the finance always associated with the management of the cars. Mm-hmm. And when we start to talk about CO2, we tend to focus the discussion around the emission, the metric around emission, but not the metric around the link between the reduction of the emission with the financial benefits that we can get. So let's take one example. When you go for a EV project, in most of the case, the first and the unique solution the companies they focus, it's about the conversion of combustible models for hybrid or EV models. However, in between, you can have some alternatives if the nature of your company makes sense. You have mobility solutions that can bring a good benefit in terms of not only CO2 reduction, but on top also in terms of cost associated with. So if we switch specific trips by bikes or by public transportation with less emission, automatically you are granting both benefits in your CO2 metrics calculation, but on top, you can have here some financial benefits to be computed and to be calculated as well.
Thank you so much. You had a slide, you had in one of the slides reference to a mobility score calculator or a mobility score calculation. Can you explain a little bit how that works practically? Is that based on surveys, or how do you come to the conclusions?
Yeah, so basically here it's about the investigation of how to design the driver's profiling. Yeah, so when we start to look the different databases, meaning, okay, you can have a HR database in terms of the benefits associated to the employees. You have the fleet database associated with this mileage, consumptions, and all of this. We start to get conclusions that a combination of all this data, it's required in order to get a proper conclusion on this profiling and associate or link this profiling with the possible alternatives in terms of mobility. So the concept in the end, it's not only about this define the profiling of the employee, but it's about the readiness and the need. So that's why, let's say we use the concept of a score calculation for mobility. So we can get conclusion that, okay, for a group of employees, for example, employees that go to the field every day to visit customers, we can reach a score that, okay, not 100% of them are eligible to switch for a mobility alternative, but 10% of them in a specific area, for example, that attend a big city center of Paris, they are eligible because the conditions they have in terms of traffic allows them to switch, and it's even more beneficial and more efficient if they switch for another alternative. So that's this is how comes the concept around this score of mobility calculation.
Super. Thank you so much, Almy. And it's 11 o'clock. It's 11:30 actually. And this closes our session. Almy, once again, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the presentation. And now I invite all the attendees to go into the next sessions and see us later on the main stage. Thank you so much, Almy. Hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.